Well, hello and welcome to the Wheeler Centre for Sport and Major Events, the last in the series of wonderful debates and conversations that have been happening here this week at the Wheeler Centre. I'm Angela Pippos. And before we get started, I might just tell you a little story. I should warn you, in fact, that the last time I sat in this particular chair was the night that Julia Gillard knocked on Kevin Rudd's door. So, I'm not saying that I'm superstitious or anything, but if anyone would like me to move my seat, or indeed stay here, just let me know. It was a very eventful night because we'd had no idea what was going on until we got in our cars afterwards and turned on the radio. Anyway, here we are, and let's hope that no such thing happens tonight. Joining me on the panel, furthest away from me, is Perry Crosswhite AM. Perry is the head of the Australian Commonwealth Games Association. He's one of Australia's most experienced sports administrators. In his long career, he's held senior positions with the Australian Olympic Committee, the 2000 Sydney Olympics and 2006 Melbourne Commonwealth Games organising bodies, the Australian Sports Commission and Australian Institute of Sport. And you may have already guessed that basketball is his chosen sport, representing Australia at the Munich, Montreal and Moscow Olympics. Gideon Haigh, right next to me, hasn't represented Australia in basketball. Cricket is his preferred sport, and I believe he plays it very well. He's written about, 8,000 books. He seems to launch a new one every other week, and they do launch very well. I've been to a few of them. He left newspapers for freelance journalism in 1995 and hasn't looked back, and he shares the same birthday as me, December the 29th. Just a little bit of trivia there for you.
The two of us, and Booney.
And Booney and Brad Hodge.
Really? Syed Kirmani, the Indian wicketkeeper as well.
All right, and Mary Tyler Moore. We could go on. Please welcome Perry and Gideon. We are here to talk about sport and major events, and we all know that the calendar is rather crowded in Melbourne. On the international front, we have tennis, Grand Prix, spring racing, the MotoGP, golf, Boxing Day Test. Domestically, 9 AFL teams in Melbourne, 2 A-League teams, Bushrangers, Stars, Renegades, Storm, Rebels, Vixens, Tigers and Aces, just to name a few. It is a crowded landscape, Gideon, firstly to you, but do we want to be defined as the world's best city for sporting events? Are we selling ourselves a bit short?
It's not a bad thing to be defined as. I can think of worse things to be defined as. There are great cities for sport, and they're usually great cities. You know, New York is a great city for sport, and it happens to be a great city at the same time. So we're in pretty good company. I was in Dubai last year. How many people have been to Dubai here? I was visiting Dubai Sports City, what's called Sports City. It's part of the vast Dubai land development there. It's 50 million square feet of sports-themed real estate. There's a 60,000 seat rugby and soccer stadium, a 25,000 seat cricket stadium. There's a luxury golf course, the Ernie Els course. There is a football academy. There's a hockey academy. Actually, most of these things aren't actually finished. The reason that I went there is to visit the International Cricket Council, which has its headquarters there. And there are unfinished buildings for as far as the eye can see. But it did strike me as very interesting that Dubai, which has no sporting heritage at all, was looking to become a sports location, or at least a place that identified itself with sport, because it sees being a sports city as kind of identifying with a sort of a luxury lifestyle and creating a leisure class, sport as a consumer good. Sport as a consumer good, I think, rather than as a cultural expression. And I think when I came home, I thought, well, isn't that fantastic that we actually have that here naturally? We're born into it. We're marinated in a sporting culture, and yet I do at the same time see a kind of a desire in the sort of the events cycle, the events culture, a desire to kind of Dubai-ise Melbourne, to change the nature of the city that I grew up in. But I'll talk about that a bit later.
you touched on New York, and London is London. London's not known as, a great sporting city. It's never touted by their politicians the way that we do it here. Perry, are you comfortable with the way that Melbourne is portrayed internationally?
I think I would follow Gideon's lead and say it's probably better than some other things we could be. I think we have to also look at what Melbourne has as both natural and infrastructure advantages, which actually lend itself to allow this to happen. We've probably a very good public transport system in this, although sometimes it doesn't work very well. But it is actually with a centralized train system and light rail system and also freeways, certainly a lot better than other places in the world, so that you can actually move people in and out of the MCG, for instance, within 45 minutes, which is a very unheard of thing overseas. So I think those type of things, plus the airport, clean air, clean water, low pollution levels, all of those things naturally add up to a place that it's good to run events in. It's probably good to do other things in it as well. But therefore, you take those natural attributes and you say it's good to be an event city. I think you have to have something to attract the people to come to the other side of the world. And so, those that are born here probably don't realize that at times. I was born elsewhere and I came here, and I always have been told so many times by my relatives, you're on the other side of the world, and why do we want to come and see you? And it's a situation where you've got to attract people to come here if you want to have them see what we have and share with them and potentially make a little bit of money, which sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. And I think Melbourne, therefore, it is a thing you can do with attraction. And I don't think it's just sport. We actually attract people for exhibitions, for talent contests, for fashion, for all of those things we do well in that respect as well. So I think, yeah, like I don't have a problem with Melbourne wanting to be the event city of the world, but they need to have a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek when they do it.
Although interesting, the flip side of that issue of distance is that one of the reasons why we have a very strong Indigenous sporting culture here is because we were so far away from the rest of the world, and we had to create our own amusements. It was one of the very first things that we set ourselves to doing in Melbourne. You know, Melbourne's settled in 1835. In 1838, the Melbourne Cricket Club is created. It's the longest continuous sporting institution, perhaps institution, in Australia. And you know, we had enormous advantages in Melbourne, as Perry was saying. We're very flat. We have great space and we have great sunlight. Space was not at a premium in the way that it was in England, and I think people immediately enjoyed the potential of Melbourne to amuse themselves, and they had to, because there was no sort of passing entertainment trade for them to tap into. In the other corner are those people who say that it is a colossal waste of money. As a sports administrator, Perry, how do you go combating that belief that's held out there? I think money could be better spent in health, education.
You have to accept that there's an argument for that, because I've seen particular events, and there may be even certain running at the present time, which but you could make a good case for that. I guess it comes down to what are your priorities, and what if you didn't spend the money on that, what would you spend it on? And unfortunately, if they didn't spend it on that, I'm not sure they would spend it on anything much better. And I'm talking about our political leaders, although you never know. I think that sporting events have been touted, I think, in recent years as being the economic miracles. And they're economic miracles for potentially the people that are running them, and some of the people that make money from them. But in most cases, events basically cost money, and it's an investment. And I come from that side of it. It's an investment in certain things that you want to achieve in your community, whether it be community pride or assistance with encouraging young people to take part in sport, or development of legacies such as facilities or expertise among officials that gain from running those events. And I think if you put those on one side of the ledger and say what they cost, then you can do some sort of balancing act. But look, I understand the argument, but I'm a bit of a cynic in believing that I'm not sure if you save that money, it's going to be spent by the politicians on something something that's although much better.
It is interesting that it frequently results in a kind of a turning of the tables, the argument about the economic benefits of sport. Frequently it's sort of liberal thinkers who say, well, show me the economic benefits. The people who usually are disinclined to talk about the economic aspects of anything, who are urging you to look past the dollar and short-term profitability. And it's the people who are advocating a rigid calendar or a big calendar of sporting events who are going, but look at all the soft benefits. Look at all the additional benefits. Look at the cultural impact. You can't measure these things in dollars and cents. So the tables are turned a bit. Tomorrow I'm going to write a piece. I've written a piece for the Oz where I talk about why I think Australia should play a one-day international against Afghanistan. Afghanistan, the cricket culture is incredibly strong and vibrant at the moment. It's probably the most normal aspect of Afghani society. The team's playing great cricket at the moment. We're going to play a series against Pakistan later this year in August. It won't be played in Pakistan because of the security situation. We could easily play a game in Sri Lanka or in Malaysia against Pakistan and Afghanistan at the same time. Now, there is no economic argument for playing against Afghanistan. You would lose money, but it's just a good thing to do.
Cricket Australia's response?
We will find out tomorrow.
You can't let us know now.
Yeah.
Well, we should talk about the Grand Prix. I mean, it was the perfect lead-in before. The circus is about to roll into town again. Now, Robert Doyle came out. How dare he have his own opinion?
Robert Doyle came out?
Came
Did I miss something?
No, not like Magnet. Came out and said that perhaps it should move on up when the current contract expires. And of course, Jeff Kennett said that it's the cornerstone of our sporting calendar. Where do both of you
cornerstone of a
gentlemen
calendar?
sit?
You cannot have a cornerstone of a calendar.
What does that mean?
Sorry.
Well, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Where do you sit on the debate about the Grand Prix? I mean, it loses $70 million every year.
Well, we were talking before. I think Perry we were talking before about the Grand Prix, and Perry was suggesting that events have life cycles, and I suspect that the Grand Prix is at the end of its life cycle, and that it's kept in Melbourne by a degree of dogmatism, of Kennett-esque dogmatism, that we're like the proverbial Soviet scientist, we're going to have to repeat the experiment until we get the right result.
Yeah, I think that, if there was a way of reinventing it, and coming up. I mean, we had the Grand Prix in Melbourne back in the 50s in Albert Park, and it came and went, and then of course we had the Grand Prix in Adelaide, and it came to Melbourne. I don't know how many years ago, but it's been here a while, and it is much the same format, except for this year it doesn't have some of the stuff races around it. I think some of the celebrity races are not, but they're costing too much money or something to be able to do. So possibly an event like that needs, which is very expensive, and it's also is one that requires. And there are a lot of people no doubt in the city that support it. Maybe it needs to have another look at itself to see whether it can come out in a different way, be done in a different form.
Do you think it's fair to say that Melburnians haven't really connected with it? And why do you think that is? Is it because it came from somewhere else and was transplanted here? Or is it because of our thriving domestic sporting scene?
Yeah, we don't do it here.
We don't.
There is no local culture of motorsport, not that I've noticed anyway, and it kind of leaves no trace behind it. That is the nature of Formula One Grand Prix racing. It's like a self-contained world that travels from city to city. But some countries definitely do have a motorsport tradition that I don't think we can. It's not our style.
No.
It's not our style.
Yeah, I agree with that. The other thing is, you need to have your own people in sport. You need to have your own athletes and competing. And I'm not using the same analogy possibly of the racing company, although they would be phenomenal athletes, I would assume, because of the reactions and their eyesight and the things and their fitness they have to have. But you actually, I think we have one Australian in the series right now, and over in the past we haven't had any for a while.
And he lives in Switzerland, I think.
And we did have a world champion, but I don't think we had a Grand Prix at the time we had one. This was some time ago. And when Jack Brabham was driving, it was very strong in this country. And Jack Brabham was the world champion, and people followed him. But that was back in the 50s. So I think that sometimes people that are, these events are put on as a economic or some sort of event. They forget that actually people see them as sport, and they want to be able to be able to follow their fellow Australian in that sport. That's why in Commonwealth Games, Olympic Games, cricket, football, go through all the sports. We have local champions, and they're the ones that, and we all keep waiting for the tennis players to come back. We used to have them. We want them to come back. We want them to be in the finals, even though the men's final was fantastic this year, the tennis, but it would have been great if there was an Australian in it. And I think that's important too.
I, for one, would like to see the Grand Prix rev out of here. Yeah, I don't really want to see it. But I must say, it did give me a great career highlight in Adelaide. It was Ayrton Senna's last race for McLaren. And back in those days, Marlboro was one of the sponsors. And on the Wednesday night of Grand Prix week, there was a Marlboro party. And as quite a young journo, I went along to this party, found myself talking to Ayrton Senna at the bar. Wasn't much taller than me, actually, which is it's nice to be able to speak to a male athlete about my height. Doesn't happen often, no horse racing, but anyway, he offered me a cigarette, and I'll never forget it because I was so taken by him and struck by him. I said, "Oh yes," and then I realised, well, I don't actually smoke. What am I going to do in this situation? So I sort of it was his cigarette. I think it came out of his mouth, and I sort of went like that and turned my back to him and tried to have a smoke. I've never had a cigarette in my life, but I shared one with Ayrton Senna, which was kind of special. But apart from that, the Grand Prix doesn't really.
Phil Tufnell once botted a cigarette off me.
He what?
He botted a cigarette off me.
Oh.
He said, "Can I have a fag, mate?"
Right.
At the back of the pavilion at Lord's. That was a sporting highlight for me.
Let's talk about the Commonwealth Games, because that's a topic very close to your heart, Perry. And a number of people I've spoken to leading up to this night, and just from journalism over the years, have argued that it is a waste of time and money because it's linked to our colonial past, and those links don't exist today in that same form, and the competition's not so strong because it's like the Soccer World Cup without Brazil and Germany, and which would have been good for the Socceroos if Germany wasn't in the World Cup. I
can feel Perry coming off the long run here.
I know. Well, Perry, present the case for the Commonwealth Games.
Well, it's interesting. I probably get asked, I don't know how many times a week, probably not a week, is the Commonwealth Games still relevant? And I say, well, what's relevant? I guess relevant to what? The Commonwealth Games was never supposed to be an Olympic Games, and that's the problem, I think, that everybody seems to think it is. It was actually developed as another event inside the 2 years between the Olympic Games, which was for the people of the common heritage and background that would come together every 4 years with young people, and they would play in a friendly manner. Now, a lot of that's a little bit trite and the rest of it, but it has kept those so that taking part and there's no qualification standards, and some of the best athletes come together with some of the fairly ordinary ones from third world countries and other countries as well. And they get together and they compete and they all have a great time, and it costs a bit of money for whoever puts it on, and then they go home. But it doesn't have to be as big as it is now. This is the issue. I think what's happened is because Melbourne Commonwealth Games was a fantastic games, but in many respects it wasn't about the Commonwealth Games, it was about Sydney. Melbourne was about Sydney can run an Olympic Games, we can run a Commonwealth Games just as well, and they did. But 2 weeks after the Games, that was great. What do we do next? Now, we're going to the Gold Coast for the Games in 2018, and that's probably around the right size, and it actually will provide some legacies. It will actually bring the Gold Coast people together. So I'm not from Miami, and I'm not from Southport, and I'm not from Coolangatta. I'm from the Gold Coast. And they'll get some good legacies out of it. Almost all of the venues are there, or they'll be using the movie world sound stages for boxing and wrestling, and that's fantastic. So you don't build new ones.
Will they have sort of a giant water slide as an event?
That sounds good to me. And they'll have the opening ceremony on the beach.
Yes.
Can you have a race on a roller coaster?
Instead of spending $85 million on a flying tram and a duck. So, let's what I'm trying to say is when people talk about it, the Commonwealth Games and as it outlives, it'll still continue as long as people want to come to it. You know, and there were problems in Delhi, and some of the best athletes didn't go in the Commonwealth for all sorts of reasons, not necessarily just because it was in Delhi. Well, that was probably a pretty good reason.
Crowds were poor in Delhi. I mean, obviously it's
well, that's got a lot to do with that's got a lot to do with the culture of the Indian culture. And Indians love cricket. But the rest of the sports, even though they're good at some, particularly hockey, you know, there's the spectators, they don't have a good culture of actually going to them or paying to go. And a lot of the people don't have the money to go either. So I think that the Commonwealth Games will continue as long as it's able to put itself in the position it was always created in, rather than trying to be something else. And I think that's hopefully the way it's moving.
You were involved in that bid for Gold Coast 2018. Tell us about that bidding process. I mean, was there lots of competition for it?
No, there were two cities, and one was a country in Sri Lanka, a small city in the south of Sri Lanka, and they're totally two contrasting bids. Gold Coast, which was a developed city, huge amounts of accommodation, sporting facilities of a medium-sized basis, but very strong. Australians can run games and all, had it so many times. Sri Lanka never had the games. Third world country coming out of a civil war, basically wanting to build a $6 billion sports city in the south, in a fishing village the size of Wollongong, and that had been hit by the tsunami. The Chinese had built a naval base and an air force base there, and they were going to expand on all of that. So you had those two contrasting, and to us, there's no choice, because why would you spend $5 billion of the Sri Lanka's money? They can't afford to build those facilities. That's not the way they think, and that's not a way a lot of the people certain people in the world think either, because they think that's right. I remember talking to one IOC member, I think it was in the Ivory Coast, when we were bidding for the Sydney Games. I said, "Why do you want to build all these facilities?" I said, He said, "Well, back in the 1100s or 1000s in France, they built Notre Dame, and they couldn't afford it then either. And look at it now." And I tried to work out what the relationship between Notre Dame and a sports stadium was, but I didn't go any further on that. But that is the field. That is the type of approach you get. And they got 27 votes out of 71, and I'm surprised they got more than one. But that's just the way it is.
Interestingly, in Sri Lanka for the World Cup last year, Sri Lanka was held the World Cup with India for cricket. And they spend a fortune on new stadiums, and they've left themselves with a $57 million debt and no money even to pay their players. So the Sri Lankan team at the moment in Australia are playing as amateurs. They're all hoping that they will get paid when they go and play in the Indian Premier League a little bit later on. But that idea of Sri Lanka becoming a great sporting event location has been a debacle.
But I think, Angela, what we're trying to do is to come up with a model in the Gold Coast so you might be able to use in the Caribbean or use in Africa or somewhere else, which is using existing facilities, overlays, not huge, and still have the best athletes there, and they still will come as long as it's run well in that respect. So that's what we're trying to do.
Interestingly, China's been a great investor in sporting stadia around the world as a means of spreading its sphere of influence, and they built a lot of the new stadiums for cricket's World Cup in 2007. And there are some very funny stories about the Chinese in the West Indies. Someone was telling me about the new stadium in Antigua that the ICC were looking at the plans for the Antiguan stadium, and that they'd put the practice pitches like that, overlapping in a cross formation, and they were sort of going around looking at this is the entry gate, this is the new grandstand, this is the press box, and this is the statue of Chairman Mao.
So, would you be sitting down to watch the Commonwealth Games, Gideon? Is that something?
I did actually go to the Commonwealth Games, and I thought it was. I like the MCG. I love it's a wonderful stadium, and it's such an Australian idea of having a stadium that is so bloody big that anyone can get into. Having a private club that can host 100,000 people at a time. It's just a classically demotic Australian idea. So I went because it was the MCG, not necessarily because it was the Commonwealth Games.
Yeah, and I think a lot of probably Melbourne Knights did as well.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the athletic competition was good, but it wasn't it wasn't the same as the Olympics or the World Championships. But they went, and it was fantastic weather. And you went there, and as the MCG, it was just a great place to see sport.
I don't want to upset you again, Perry, but the Crawford Report into the funding of Australian sport concluded that we perhaps placed too much emphasis on gold, 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 and that money would be better spent at the grassroots level, and perhaps we should stop striving for a top 5 finish on the medal tally. How did you see that report? What were your sort of major concerns about it, if any?
My major concern was that it said that all sport had to be like AFL football. And that's the take that most people took from it. I don't think that he was saying that, but that's sort of, let's turn all sport into a business. And sport isn't business. Sport should be run on some business principles, but a lot of people involved in sport for many different reasons and not necessarily a profit motive. In fact, the ones that are in profit motive, you start to wonder about at times. But my view is that I don't think we should ever stop striving to be as good as we can be, and the Australians are like that. They want to be the best they can be in the world. I don't think that, however, that you should therefore concentrate all your money in that area, whether it be from taxes or revenue, or you need to have a really good balance and encourage participation and for healthy reasons and for all sorts of other reasons. And I think that's the main challenge. And sometimes people get it right and sometimes they don't.
Is it fair to channel money into fringe sports that are often played by individuals rather than teams just to pump up the medal tally?
Well, that's interesting comment, because some people would say, well, that's all we should. We just shouldn't put them into teams because they cost too much. We don't get enough medals out of it. So it's interesting. I think that they come from a team sport, as you said. Yes. I think they should count all the medals that you have. You have 7 players in a netball team, or 12. You should give 7 medals rather than only 1. But I'll never win that argument. No. But look, I think that. Medal tallies are a great trap, and I say that coming from a company which we've been on top of the medal tally in Commonwealth since 1990. Not sure about the ones coming in Glasgow, because I think the English and the Welsh and the Scots and the Northern Ireland are going to have a go at us pretty well, but that's another matter. But I think that unfortunately that's how you get marked, and you get marked by the press, and you get marked by the people. That's what they look at. And so, at the end of the day, I think people have to take notice of that. But it's a fair comment that maybe we should not worry too much about a medal table, and more about where we naturally should be involved in the sports that we're naturally involved in. But we're a great equalitarian society, and we're freedom. We allow any person to take part in any sport they want to take part, as long as it doesn't have an effect on someone else that's detrimental. And it would be a shame if that didn't continue, because that's our society. Unlike, say, East Germany or some of those people in the past, where they said you can compete in 8 sports and that's all you get.
Gideon, did you agree with the thrust of the Crawford Report?
Well, I must admit that when we talk about Melbourne being a major sport location, for me the major sport that is in my life is the game of cricket that I play at the weekend on my suburban oval. And I remember some years ago I was down at training at the Yarras on a Tuesday night, and there were a bunch of guys toiling away in 3 nets, and I can remember over one side of the oval there was the football club having their pre-season training. There was a bunch of guys playing touch footy on the other side of the oval. There were 2 old hippies throwing a frisbee. A bunch of runners came running across the middle of the oval, and I thought, I really do live in a great sports city. When I see people participating in sport, that to me is a great measure of whether we have a sporting culture, and sometimes we take it for granted. And in fact, I actually see that it is bizarre that as there has been this increasing emphasis on medal tallies and the cultivation of major events, that in some respects there's an inverse correlation with the actual health and well-being of Australians, that we're actually getting fatter and lazier and stupider as we sit at home on television watching all these major sporting events. It does the event mentality does seem to me to be sometimes turning us all into passive receptors of the sporting experience, and there's a temptation to think that they're turning sort of Melbourne into one sort of giant television, and the rest of us, we're just sort of channel surfers.
Getting fatter.
Yeah, it's an artefact of a leisure society and mass prosperity, the event mentality, turning us into kind of passive consumers of sensation after sensation, and it creates a world where we're kind of excited about a lot, but we care about relatively little, and we're just sort of addicted to a series of expensive thrills.
And it's something that's happened. I mean, it happened in the Roman times with bread and circuses, and it's an analogy which you can use. And if the population ended up like that and not essentially, well, what's the next circus that we're going to go to, and not taking part, as Gideon's talking about, in your local cricket competition, or then I think we would, as a society, be into trouble. I don't think we're there, and we're not. And sometimes we move there, and sometimes we don't. But we have a large participation rate in all sorts of sports in this country, as well as other types of activities and recreations or leisures. Or, I mean, I always tell people my favourite sport is actually contemplation, and I can sit and they don't know whether I'm contemplating or not because I'm probably asleep. But that's it's the whole theory of what is leisure, and leisure is a state of mind. And some people leisure is by going and watching a football match, and some people actually taking part in some sort of other type of activity.
The other aspect of community sport that I think is absolutely fundamental and is too often overlooked is that in order to create the kind of the event, the phenomenon of community sport, it requires organisational skills and the creation of social capital. Right. We learn our skills as citizens often. I reckon it's actually the chief way that we learn our skills as citizens, through creating volunteer sporting organisations. And I think that's been the state in Australia for a very long time. Yeah. If you look back at the Fathers of Federation in Australia, I reckon about 80% of them had some sort of sporting association. They were vice presidents of a cricket club, or they were involved in the racing industry, or they were involved in a football club, or in rugby. A lot of them learned how to run a meeting, how to organise a committee, how to put together numbers, how to win friends and influence people through the experience of working in a sporting club.
Childhood obesity we touched on before. You've been to so many games, Commonwealth Olympic Games. Is there any evidence that gold medals make kids take up that sport?
There is some anecdotal, like, more or less, rather than objective, that they do. When you have a sporting event, there are greater numbers of registrations in sporting clubs. Whether that then turns into actually participation is no studies I've ever seen have concluded with that or actually looked at that. It's more, as I say, the view that we hope this happens, rather than whether we know it happens or it doesn't happen. If you actually talk with some of the, and I have, with some of the athletes that have been in Commonwealth Games teams and other teams, and you ask them how they got involved, some of them say it's because of what they have. They actually have a role model. They actually seen someone that has either been an Australian or someone that they've followed through their career, and they follow that person and then become that. Now that's a very small percentage. I mean, you're talking about, in the hundreds if you're lucky. As to the wide part of society, and particularly young people, as to whether they, because you hold an Olympic Games or a Commonwealth Games, or Australian Golf Open or Australian Tennis, whether they actually go and take it up. I'm probably a bit of a cynic to believe that that's not the reason they get involved. They actually probably get involved because either their parents will take them to the venues that they're available facilities that they at school for somehow get involved in school, or they actually get together and decide, we love cricket, we're going to play cricket in the local park, and one or two of them actually then start actually getting some skills and then end up in the system, so to speak. So I guess that's an answer. I would say probably no. If I had to sum it for the answer, I don't think there is probably any direct correlation that could be proved, but we all like to believe there is.
let's round out our discussion on the Olympics with what you're most looking forward to later this year. Where are the medals going to come from?
Oh dear. The medals will always come from swimming,
Yes.
you know, and I'd like to believe that they'll do as well as they have in the past, the swimmers, and they could. I think we're going to have a lot more competition these games, particularly in China, but also the Europeans, where we haven't had it before, and the Americans, of course. Cyclists, it depends on the day. You know, sometimes you have a good games and sometimes you don't, but we'll win some medals in cycling, whether we have outstanding games and win a lot of that's rowing, various particular groups, both women and men in rowing. Triathlon, could get medals there. Hockey, men's hockey particularly, maybe women's hockey, probably down. Women's basketball. We could pick up something in like trampolining or gymnastics, or you know.
They have a medal in trampolining.
Absolutely.
Haven't you seen that?
Haven't you seen them? They're fantastic. We want a gold medal to Sydney Olympics in trampolining.
It's another win for Pester Power, isn't it? Yeah. You can just see the little kids going, "You got to get me a trampoline, Mum, because I'm going to get Olympic gold."
And then you've got to make sure they got medical insurance for all the times they get thrown off.
Yes.
Like my son and daughters and so forth, how many broken bones they had from falling off the trampoline. So I think, you know, we'll pick up some minor medals in some of the other sports, but it is.
Track and field, obviously.
Yeah, sorry, I mentioned track and field, and Sally should do well, and maybe a couple of others. But the trouble is, there's an immense amount of pressure on those people that and a lot of times the people we think are going to do well, they don't.
Well, Steve Hooker at the moment.
Well, it's very interesting with him. He's become a situation where he's actually mentally, the pressure has really gotten to him, and he's just afraid to jump.
The pressure of being an Olympic year, is it linked to that, or is it just?
Oh yeah, but if people don't realise that how dangerous the pole vaulting is.
Oh,
and because you can imagine if you just jumped off the top and tried to hit that mat, rather than you're going up in a different way. So I think some of that gets to them,
right.
But I think also it's a fact that. It is very much a mental. Like most people have the strength and the timing, but it's all got to come together exactly right to get the actual jump that you need. And Steve has had a lot of success at a younger age, and I think as he's matured, maybe. I mean, his parents are both Commonwealth Games athletes and track and field athletes from the past, and he's come up in that system. But so look, Angela, to answer your question, for as far as the Australian team for London, it's really in the lap of the gods whether they can do as well as they did in the previous games, or whether they'll drop out of that whatever that magical top 7 or whatever it is. That's and it'll depend on what happens for the day. They'll all give their best, I'm sure.
Yep. I always like to talk about something shambolic, these things.
My cricket club. Are you going to talk about
your cricket club?
I really feel connected to your cricket club after
Yeah.
reading The Invincibles.
Oh,
It's
good.
a wonderful book. I'm sure some people here have read it. It's great. I love it.
It is.
I feel like I know the characters well.
We're still vincible.
Yeah.
Life has imitated art.
No, I was going to talk about the bidding process for the World Cup, the Soccer World Cup. And it cost us more than $45 million for one vote. Now...
But
Ben
what a
Buckley,
vote! What a vote it was!
Ben Buckley said the process was flawed, which is the understatement of the year.
If you lose, it's
Who would
definitely
have thunk
flawed.
it?
Was it worth having a crack at? Were we just too naive, or was it worth all of that?
Well, a lot of people spent even more money on their bids than Australia, and it doesn't matter whether you got one vote or just enough to be second. You're still a loser. But I mean, I think we were naive, and we were a bit callow and inexperienced, I think, in FIFA politics. But thank goodness we are. I don't think I want to live in a country that's too good at manipulating the FIFA system.
Yes. The Earl Macpherson factor. I mean, there were some strange things with our bid as well. The
animated
cartoon.
kangaroo, yes.
And sending, a model who's... Is she still a model? I'm not even sure. But, someone who's perhaps in the twilight of her modelling career over there to represent us. It just seemed just...
It really is. It was a terrible cartoon version of Australia. It was excruciatingly embarrassing, and really I'd just prefer that you didn't talk about it. I'm feeling a sense of reflected vicarious shame.
Yeah, well, hopefully, things will change in the sport, and then the next time we do have a go at it, it'll be a level playing field. Do you have that optimism for soccer at the world level?
Well, there doesn't seem to have been any change at FIFA subsequently, and I think all international sporting organisations have a trend of sort of political entropy. Cricket is, if it hasn't gone the same way, is already on the way. We are hosting the World Cup here in 2015, but in a sense we're very lucky to have got it in the first place. It was once again a piece of horse trading at ICC level that got us over the line, and it may actually be the last time that the World Cup is held outside of England and India most of all. It's because there is so much money in India, and it is by such a long way the largest cricket market. There is actually a financial and cultural logic to holding every single ICC event in India. If you really want to go with an economic argument, there's really no one else can win.
Final question before we open the floor. Is there anything about 2020 cricket that you like? You've seen the new summer of Stars and Renegades. Is there anything there that you liked?
Well, I like that people go. I think it's great that people go. Anything that gets people along to domestic cricket in whatever form is to be applauded, and that gets people excited about cricket in general. I have all sorts of concerns about T20. They're not fundamentally with the game. They're more with the second and third order effects of T20 and how it affects our general sense of hierarchy and the overall value system of cricket. But as far as T20 is concerned, it's not my favourite style of cricket, but it is still cricket. And sometimes I think we succumb to the idea that, it's sort of over there and it has no effect on the rest of the game. Well, it actually does, because cricket is a kind of an interdependent ecosystem. And you actually can't invest huge sums of money in T20 cricket and make the financial incentives for T20 so much greater than they are for other forms of the game and not have an effect on the rest of the game. And I think it's sometimes it's a bit fatuous and a bit insulting to my intelligence to pretend otherwise.
Did you watch it, Perry? Do you like it?
I like all sport, and I like particularly the end of most of the matches. Not because it's ending, but because it's usually, particularly when it's close. Because it reminds me more probably of baseball when I grew up, much less than traditional.
Well,
cricket.
George Bernard Shaw once did say that baseball and cricket were comparable activities, but baseball was better because it ended more quickly. And I think it is kind of ironic that cricket seems to have been redesigned along lines for the interests of George Bernard Shaw.
Okay, let's open up to the floor now and some questions. Yes, at the back.
I just wanted to respond. I wanted to respond to that point about whether we're connecting with the Grand Prix. And I'm suggesting that some of the reasons we're not are that Kennett promised there would be no funding at all for that Grand Prix. It was purely to guarantee the loans. Now, that's a complete travesty and a betrayal. Secondly, there was particular legislation whereby we as citizens funding this show were never entitled to the nature of that contract. It is enriching Eccleston and a certain family in Melbourne. Now, regarding this democratic nature of all of this, women are scarcely involved in this. It's very macho. We are losing parkland hand over fist to male sports for male corporate entities who sit on these male boards of all these shows.
Don't think you'll get very much disagreement from any of us up here. They're well spoken.
Yes, sir.
Would you like to speak into the mic, sir? I represent Save Albert Park, and you can now start all groaning. We know what he's going to say, but no, you don't. It seems to me that most of the panel agree with most of Save Albert Park's thoughts on the subject of the Grand Prix. We've been researching major events in over 19 years of our existence, and we've got reports showing that the last Commonwealth Games, Melbourne Commonwealth Games, was a financial fiasco, that the Olympic Games in Sydney were equally, if not worse, and caused a diminution of tourism, not an increase. Anyway, I liked Gideon's description of the Grand Prix. Well, the reason it's still here is due to
dogmatism.
Kenneth-esque dogmatism. I think I've written that down. We can use that.
Yep.
Now, I'm going to ask a question, is what I'm supposed to do, and I'll direct it to Perry. You did say, I think, earlier on in your address that if we didn't have these major events, what would we spend our money on? Well, I think there are so many things that you could spend your money on, apart from, say, doubling or tripling our riot squad, which is quite the most remarkable decision. Anyway, I would think that you could spend money on improving our educational facilities for overseas students. That is of far greater economic significance than major events. And I'd like your comments on that.
Well, I don't see how I could disagree with that. When I said it's the decision of what you spend your money on, unfortunately, a lot of times it's not you and I that get to have that much say in that. It's the politicians that make the decision on what they spend their money on. And I'm not sure, having been around politicians for a long time, that they would come to the same conclusion that you and I might come to with respect to education for overseas students. But certainly, I'd personally agree it's very important that there is a balance in society and balance in the economy, and that you spend money on the things that are needed. And the basic things that are needed money should be spent on first.
It is kind of staggering to me that we read frequently about how incredibly lucrative globalised professional sport is, and yet at the end of the day there is an expectation somehow that the state has bottomless coffers to support it. Why does the state never have access to these supernormal profits that accrue to sport? We just seem to be like this sort of bank that lends out money that it never expects to get back.
Absolutely.
Just a quick question, going back to the Crawford Report. I just find it intriguing in this day and age of better data capture and data mining and analysis, particularly in sport, that, we had this debate, it was grist for the mill in my sport and politics lectures 14 years ago. With my lecturer, the historian Darryl Adair used this as a reason for debate within lectures 14 years ago, and I just find it an indictment that we're still having these discussions without actually coming up with a quantitative analysis of whether, Perry, you touched upon it before about, you see some trends after major events or success at Olympics and other sporting events, but we don't have that correlation, that real analytical discussion and results to actually put this debate to bed, so that we can not just for one off say, well, this is one begats the other, or one is better than the other. That this could be an ongoing point of analysis that we can actually track trends, and I just find it intriguing that we still haven't arrived at a point where we have a year in, year out analysis of what actually is more effective in terms of results at major events and grassroots participation.
Do you share that frustration?
I do, and with for 40 years that I've spent call it the profession, I'm probably one of the people to blame that never ensured that that sort of thing happened, and it is something that I would certainly share that view on. We talk to people that are in research all the time about it, but we never follow it up, and we never fund it properly. We never do any of the things that needs to be done in that respect, and it's certainly something that a lot of us that have been in it for a long time should hang our head in shame that it hasn't been done, because it really needs to be.
How did we ever live before economic models? Well, how did we know what to do? How did we do the cost-benefit analysis? I don't know, we just decided that certain things were a good thing. I mean, it's interesting to me that it's the 150th anniversary this year of the first England tour of Australia. It was a group of Surrey professionals who came out here in 1861 to play a series of games. They played the first one at the MCG on the 1st of January 1862, and they were brought out here by a famous catering firm called Spears and Pond that ran the Café de Paris, which was kind of the hub of the Melbourne social scene at the time, and they had made an enormous amount of money from victualling the prospectors on their way to the goldfields. So they invested a lot of that money in bringing out this England team, and they invested a lot of money in the MCG. They actually got the MCG rent-free from the Melbourne Cricket Club, and they made so much money in the first game that they had covered their costs by the end of it, and the rest of the tour was entirely profit. Now, what's amazing to me about that is that did not become the prevailing model for cricket in Australia. Profit was not an important part of the desire to bring inbound cricket teams or to send cricket teams to England. Certainly there were commercial imperatives, a need to make ends meet, but the overwhelming desire was to prove the prowess of colonial Australians against the imperial power. And until relatively recently, cricket ran basically in order to pay its own bills and to provide sufficient money in the kitty to see us through the next season. Cricket in Australia ran like a giant club. But that has all changed, I think, probably in the last 10 years, to the extent now that you do have to ask the question, does cricket exist in order to make money, or does it make money in order to exist?
I think, just to comment on that, Gideon, that isn't it interesting that you said they got the MCG for nothing? Again, it's the state or the club or whatever it was paying the costs, meeting the costs, while the promoter makes the money. It
was just a great idea. It was the biggest grandstand in the world. It was a 6,000-seat grandstand in 1862. You know, wasn't it amazing that we had this desire, this appetite for what was a major event of its time? The interesting thing was that the following year, Spears and Pond tried to get Charles Dickens to come to Australia to read his stories because he was a famous public reader, and obviously bringing a cricket team to Australia and having Charles Dickens read stories were sort of major events that were kind of on par.
Didn't they bring Mark Twain as well?
He came later, yeah.
That's right.
Wow, fascinating. Yep, at the back. Oh, hi, it's Craig.
Just a quick one on where you see the culture of your respective sports in Melbourne. Gideon on cricket, I guess, in regards to the encroachment that the AFL's making, and in contrast that to the culture in Sydney. And Perry, I guess, contrasting it to basketball in the 90s. I remember going to sold-out Rod Laver arenas, and this year I've been to Albert Park 3 or 4 times. It's actually really been disappointing. So just interested on your take.
Well, I think AFL is not only sort of dominating, it's highly influential in the behaviour of Cricket Australia. I think the fact that Australian cricket is run from Melbourne and the fact that they have basically the overpowering influence of the AFL, it's quite it has a strong influence on their thinking. And I think in a sense the Big Bash League is a sort of a Me Too product. It's a little bit like cricket's version of the AFL. I'm not sure that if Australian cricket had been run from Sydney that we would have ended up with this kind of idea of a city-based competition with kind of tribal allegiances and members that we have at the moment. I think they've made a mistake by bringing about 2 teams in Melbourne. I don't think the market here is big enough to support it. The Stars did okay. The Renegades were terrible. And I think that the competition is spread too thinly. There are not enough good quality cricketers out there to sustain the competition at 8 teams. I thought the standard of about half the games was really awful. Some of the cricket was quite good, some of it was really bad. I don't think that anyone benefits from bad cricket. I know that television doesn't really distinguish between the two, but I don't feel good about the fact that a lot of the cricket that I saw on television was substandard. And I think that they're kind of fooling themselves if they think that they can expand the competition to 10 teams or 12 teams in the next few years. It'll just be a fiasco. We saw it happen in the Indian Premier League. That's the other great cultural influence on Australian cricket at the moment. They went from 8 teams and they blew out to, I think, 12 teams. One of the teams has disappeared. And by the end, there just weren't enough good cricketers to go round, and it was actually looking pretty bad. And the public aren't stupid. You know, they're not fooled. They won't. They like the Big Bash League for its novelty value in the first season, but if they sense that somehow they're just being served up fodder for the sake of fodder, just content for the sake of content, then they won't patronise it. And the test for the Big Bash League is not necessarily whether it's successful this year or next, but whether people are still going to it in 5 or 10 years' time. You know, we could be creating a huge problem for ourselves in Australia.
Should the second team, Perry, been in Geelong or just no second team?
That would have made more sense to me. I felt terrible for the cricketers having to play at Etihad. It's an awful stadium to go and watch anything. It's not great to watch AFL at, but at least that only goes for 2 hours. They were always going to struggle, the Renegades. And likewise, I think the Sydney Thunder and the Adelaide Strikers as well. God knows, isn't it amazing that I can actually remember their names? But,
I wasn't expecting that.
And I think, you know, if Warnie hadn't played, I think the tournament would have been in a lot of trouble. I think Warnie just got them over the line and gave them a certain credibility which they wouldn't otherwise have had.
With respect to it's a quick answer to some extent. Football got stronger and basketball got weaker, and but basketball was strong because, and there's reasons for that. Football's an indigenous, native-born sport, which is very strong and always has been. Basketball, in the way, whichever way you look at it, is a foreign sport, and it has good grassroots development here, but it's still that respect. But basketball got into the National League scene before everybody else. So they actually had a National League running when football still maybe had a team in Sydney at the time, but probably nowhere else. And everybody, each state had its state league in football, which was the most important thing. And basketball had a team in Perth, they had a team in Adelaide, a team in Brisbane, Sydney, and all of that. And they also had TV contracts locally, which helped them. So they were strong in the 80s for that reason. Now, I think what happened is football, soccer, rugby, name all the football codes, they made inroads. There's a national league, they expanded, and much more money and much more support. Basketball made a number of basic strategic errors that could be changing the time of their season and a few other things. So they basically admitted they couldn't compete. Basketball is based on a private owner situation where owners, you know, would come along, buy a team, spend a couple $1 million, wake up in about 3 years and wonder where it all went, and then try to sell the club. And eventually the club depended on what happened to that owner and that owner's business. And we don't have enough those type of people in this country to make that work as it does in America, for instance. So that's why basketball went that direction. I'm making my own, this is my summation of it, and I've got a son that plays professionally in Cairns, so I have a view that I hope it still remains around. But football now is the strongest, AFL is the strongest sport in this country. And I call it the strongest business in this country because that's what it's become. And it's supported very strongly in this city by tribal mentalities and religion and all that sort of stuff. And that's the way it is. And I would say that they've been very clever in moving it around. It'd be interesting how Western Sydney goes. as far as development, as far as that particular, that's going to be a tough area to break into. They've ignored Tasmania because they know they already have it, just typically like a business. You know, oh, we've already got that place, we'll ignore that, we'll go someplace where we aren't. So I think that football will, the way I see it and the way it's being run, will continue to grow and continue to get stronger.
And it should, because it's great. It's fantastic.
There
is great football
Melbourne
being played
team.
at the moment. It is thrilling to go and watch a game of AFL. I'm speaking here as a Geelong supporter. I'm feeling very good about football at the moment.
Yes, you're in a very comfortable position, aren't you? Things are looking good for your team.
But they are selling a great product. So, you know, more power to them. They deserve to succeed.
That's a good spot.
One more question? Oh, no, maybe 3? Why not?
G'day, I'm Peter Logan, also Save Albert Park, but I've been in athletics all my life and local government trying to get grassroots sport going. So I've sort of looked at it from the top down because I wrote to the Auditor-General as the ward councillor saying you've got to look at the Grand Prix and the impact on sport and grassroots sport because it was killing it off. So they came to my house and we framed how do you start and where do you go from there. Out of that, a peer-reviewed economic study was done, a proper cost-benefit analysis. The report's online on their website, but it's pretty clear that you separate something that's grafted onto Melbourne's culture. They were more or less saying, well, hey, this is going to cost a lot of money, do the cost-benefit analysis first. His office did one on 2005. They recommended that an annual update be done. It's never been done because there's bipartisan support for these Mickey Mouse ones. And then other sports have then had to go and do an economic impact, which has got nothing to do with benefit. And, you know, and then how to benchmark. So we've sort of dragged things down. One event's dragged everything else down in Melbourne, and I notice Ron Walker's now knocking the tennis because it's in a purpose-built stadium and his isn't, so he's knocking the cost of the purpose-built stadium, which of course pays itself off. But the fundamental is, if it's a big grafted-on one that doesn't fit with the culture, do the sums first and do the proper model. And we've been, I'd say, you know, it's a snow job what's been happening in the last few years, and will probably continue till the event actually dribbles and goes away. But we should have some lessons learned and go for that. But meanwhile, the Crawford Report's saying 90 million goes to sport. We should put more in, but actual local government supports sport in a big way. We should recognise that, and that's probably where more money should go to feed up. Thanks.
Yeah, local government does. I don't think it does as good a job as it really should. You know, I'm just dealing on an anecdotal basis with the cricket clubs that I play against every weekend. Everyone's got the horror story of dealing with an incredibly unsympathetic council who can't understand why they have to subsidise community sport. It's incredibly irritating. Yeah, I mean, you know, how many council recreation officers does it take to change a light bulb? It's a trick question because it's not their job to change a light bulb. They have an external contractor to do that. And if you ask very, very nicely, they might give you a candle.
We sacked our cricket wicket off for the same reason, but then we wrote a policy. We have 96% of your costs if you give a net community benefit back. You're not just a bloke's club on a piece of real estate that the community owns. You have to give a net benefit back, and we did that, mandated with the policy.
Which council are you in?
Port Phillip.
Okay, all right. Yeah, all right. Stonington,
need
sorry.
more people like you, I think. There were 2 other questions. Oh, maybe. Yes, sir?
I'd like to go on a different track here of the voracious appetite of all major sports for capturing public parklands. Now, I've jotted down a few points here of where sports have been taking over public parklands. Let's start with Royal Park, where they built the new hockey stadium there, and Ron Walker, no, it wasn't Ron Walker, yes it was, Ron Walker said not one tree will be removed when they're building the hockey stadium. Now, Rod Quantock and I were dragged out by the police trying to prove that there were multi-trees being removed from Royal Park. Albert Park. Well, we know about the Grand Prix down there, but the amateur athletics have been kicked out of Olympic Park, and they've now got a track down in Albert Park. So what do they do with the new track that was outside the old South Melbourne footy ground? They put a great big high wire fence around it so that the public can't get into there. They've lost their parkland there. And this is because Olympic Park's been taken over by AFL football clubs. Gosh's Paddock's been taken over by the AFL football club. Tennis stadium in Yarra Park. John Cain said, look, whatever's going up there for the tennis stadium, we will replace it with public parkland for you. What have they done? They've extended it 4 times, bigger than what it was. We haven't got a square metre of land in return. And John Cain is an honourable man, but he couldn't do anything about that. It's the voracious appetite of sports to capture our land and never give us anything back in return. But there is one redeeming feature here.
Oh, good.
It's the wonderful Etihad Stadium, built on the old swampland of Dudley Flats. Now, if public land is going to be used for future sporting events, it should be on land like that. Old quarries. Fill in the quarries and build your sporting stadiums and things there. Leave our public parks alone. Why don't you, if you're going to do anything, do what they did at Etihad Stadium and build it on junk land?
There you go.
And do you agree with me that our public land is being wasted by sport?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had an experience of this some years ago when the Coburg Tigers, the Coburg Football Club, which was basically the Richmond Reserves, wanted to take over the ground that they played on in Coburg, which they'd previously shared with the Coburg Cricket Club. In fact, the Coburg Cricket Club went back there like 120, 130 years. And they were going to kick the cricket club off because they wanted to turn Coburg Football Club into a 12-month of the year football facility for Richmond and Essendon. Actually, Essendon was going to share in it as well. But my argument was, and I wrote about it and I talked about it on radio, was what good is that to the community? No, someone in Coburg can't turn up and get a game at the Coburg Tigers. They've got to be a Richmond Reserves player first. If you're a woman, it's no bloody good for you. The Coburg Cricket Club actually had some women's teams as well. If you looked at it, if you looked at their facility as harmonising with the local community, it was doing a great job the way that it was, and it didn't need changing. Unfortunately, we managed to convince the Moreland Council to change their minds. But I know that the cricket club, having always used that facility, having had historically very deep roots in the community and deep links at that ground, began to think, my word, we can't take anything for granted these days. It's so easy for our facility to have been taken away from us. And there is something about community sport that is deeply embedded in its facilities. You can't just be moved to another home ground. That's destroyed more sporting clubs than I care to mention, the experience of being displaced from their facility. Councils should be a great deal more respectful of the links between sporting clubs and the facilities that they use, and not simply look to a user pays philosophy at all times.
I'm getting the wind-up look. Is that it, or one more question? That is it. No, one more question. Sorry. That is it, and then that is it.
That's it, or are you going to take the one?
I'm going to take your question.
Oh, you're lovely. Okay, very different type of question. I'm in tourism, and over the next 10 years, 80% of our inbound tourism will be out of China. How's that going to impact on sport in our city? Because there are connections between tourism and sport.
Well, let me speak about the Chinese rise or the Chinese interest and rise in sport, and it is in the last 10, 20 years that they're becoming much more of a sporting nation on an international stage than they were previously, so that you could get some sporting tourists from China in that respect. Don't know the numbers, haven't done any of the research, and it needs to probably be done, but certainly everybody in your industry believes that we're going to get a much more increased number of tourists from China, and I would say that you would probably want to tap into those that are interested in particularly in sport. Also probably wonder why they want to come here as tourists, and therefore then link that with what they might like to see or not see, and that sort of thing. But certainly from an international stage, they're getting stronger in all sports from their national teams, and the government is supporting sport very, very significantly.
Well, I dare say we'll get more major events of the kind that we've been talking about in order to sort of solicit the passing tourist trade. And that makes me wary because there is a kind of a mentality out there that kind of sport and entertainment are fusing, that they're kind of, that you can't see the join anymore, that sort of... and I feel sort of vaguely threatened by that, because I don't think that sport is just another leisure industry option. It's something more raw, it's something less predictable, less commodifiable, and to simply look at sport through the prism of entertainment, I think, is to turn it into something sort of fundamentally unappealing.
Well, that is it. Thank you for joining our minor event here tonight. Look forward to seeing you at another event very soon. Please join me in thanking our panellists, Gideon Haigh and Perry Crosswhite.